Hello Zen fam! So, earlier today, I was watching this channel that I watch from time to time called Sony 360. And this bloke, he's often quite a good little sort of talking chop of Sony tech and ideas and Sony history and stuff. And as a guy that's generally been interested in Sony and their devices since I was at least a teenager, if not before. You know, I've had various different types of specialized Sony headphone. Like I used to have this one set that was like, had its own radio tower, so it was not Wi-Fi but actual radio transmitter. So the actual transmitter was hooked up to my amp, which is also Sony, you know, which is hooked up to my deck, which is also Sony, which is a DJ deck, you know. So I'd be playing records on my record deck, coming through my amp, through my specialised sort of broadcasting station that was just alone for this pair of headphones and nothing else. The set cost me like about 350 quid. Don't worry, I didn't spend that kind of money. I used to work for a company, and they had a sort of scheme whereby you could earn points, and I used the points to buy this device. I eventually I sent it back because, as cool as it was, the headphones, honest to God, they were this thick. You're gonna think I'm pulling your leg. They were this thick. I kid you not, because they had the receivers in them. Beautiful headphones, incredible sound, but wildly impractical. And Sony are great at doing that kind of thing. I mean, like the Aibo, the Sony Rolly. There's all kinds of crazy Sony devices, and we're talking about a company that does electronics and does all the rest of it, but also does insurance and is trying to get into in-car entertainment, you know, and car sensor technology for self-driving vehicles. I mean, Sony really does take a crack at everything. But one of the things I do love from Sony, and should get more attention, is their phones. Now, this, as some of you long-time Sony fans out there who are members of the Zen fam who have been here, know that I like to rock a Sony Xperia 1 Mark II. The reason I like this phone, sweet screen, even lovelier camera, which is what I was intending upon using for this year's Resident that didn't happen. Let alone last year's Resident that didn't happen. This was what was going to elevate the game for me when doing live events. And then, well, you know what happened. I don't need to tell you. So I've not really been able to do that much in the way of IRL video. Now, yes, okay, I was there for the PlayStation 5 live events I was able to do, like going and doing my pre-order, and of course being first in line for that, and being first in line for getting my PlayStation 5 at launch night filmed on my trusty, 1 Mark II. And this is my third Xperia. Before this, I had the Z, a brilliant phone. And before the Z, I had the SP. And that was a great phone. And honest to God, since having that first Sony Xperia device, I don't think I'll ever go to another brand. And that's not because I'm some sort of Sony pony. It's just because I found my brand. I found what works for me. So, I watched this guy, every once in a while. I forget his name, but the channel is called Sony 360. Look it up if you want to know stuff about phones and that, but you don't want to get the usual kind of content. He reports on other Sony products as well. Anyway, but he really has a love for the Sony Xperia line, as do I. And it's always funny that Sony Xperia devices don't sell better, because they are actually really very good. But everybody's on that Apple tip. It's like, oh, he's got an Apple and she's got an Apple, so I should have an Apple. I want to be part of the conversation. Yeah, you want to be part of the conversation to buy a phone that's actually costing you 3 times what it's actually worth, considering its sensor technology comes from Sony, It's screens come from Samsung, and they just put a massive markup in everything, and the only thing that's actually in it is theirs is basically their OS, and the fact that you have no headphone jack, and that the battery life up until the last couple of phones was mince. But you know, if you like your Apple phones, I'm no going to stop you. But I personally think that, well, they're just no for me. I like Android, and I found my favourite Android. I've had a few Android phones. I've had a Samsung, a couple of Samsungs actually. I've had what else have I had? I can't remember. But anyway, I've had other Android phones, and these last 3 phones, all of them, Sony Xperia, have served me beautifully. And when we get back to conventions, the stuff that will be shot on that will be shot on this, and it'll be lovely jubbly, because that phone is cracking. There's apparently a way I can attach a microphone to it, so I've got to find out how to do that at some point, and then obviously raise the funds for the microphone. But anyway, I'm getting all sidetracked here. So, as I was saying, I was watching the channel Sony 360, and the guy was saying how much he likes his Xperia phones and how much he thought the Sony PlayStation phone from a few years ago was really fun. And you saw in the thumbnail to this video, and it just probably brought you in. Some of you may even remember it. Even some of you might have played on one. Right? Basically, what the PlayStation phone was, it was kind of like a PSP Go, but it was a phone as well. So you literally slid it apart, I mean, like that, and the controls would be at the bottom, and the screen would be on the top, and it'd be like, you know, like a sandwich basically moved apart. And it was a great device, you know, and admittedly it was a purely digital device. It was an all digital device before we started on all digital devices, because it was on the market before the PSP Go. Okay? And yeah, we all saw how the PSP Go went. Yeah. Sony and your proprietary tech, dear God. See, they don't do everything right. I will give Sony a smack bottom when they do a bad, and they've done plenty of bad. Don't you worry about that, boys and girls. So, he was talking up the idea of a PlayStation gaming phone 2. And this got me thinking about the pros and the cons of the production of such a device. Now, you could run such a device and have it link in to PlayStation Now, which would mean you wouldn't have to worry about a lack of content. Now, you would have to worry about your data plan, but if you have an unlimited data plan, you know, and unlimited data plans are not that expensive these days. If you're willing to shell out the money for a PlayStation phone, you probably have the money to sell it for an unlimited data plan. That's just a guess, but you know, I think it's a fairly decent guess. And then I started thinking about it. I started thinking about the other gaming phones we've had. Like, we had the Razer gaming phone 2. We had that add-on, I can't remember what it was called. It had a really weird name. It was like this Geefy or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it was like an add-on. There was basically 2 controllers that snapped on the side and basically turned it into sort of like, almost like a Nintendo Switch. And I thought, well, if it's got the physical controls already built into it for the sliding screen, you know, it's got that retro feel, that's kind of neat, so you could probably do that again. I mean, it's obviously they're not full sticks, but it's better than on-screen controls, because we all have tried to play video games on a tablet or on a phone, and as good as they can get, there's something missing about when you try and control a video game via on-screen commands. You know, it's like there's just no substitute for a controller in your hand. That visceral contact, you know, that that thing you can grab that isn't the actual device itself. Now, yes, you have the Nintendo Switch and other handhelds through the years. I mean, I myself, I was the proud owner of a Sega Game Gear. And I were really going back. I had a Game Gear, yes indeed. You know, and you know, you can get a bit hand crampy and stuff. Now, of course, the Nintendo Switch, you can, you know, put its little kickstand out and break out a Pro controller, or get out the dog controller and slap on the Joy-Cons and play that way in that weird little square. You can do that, but let's face it, most people who are travelling with a Switch are not going to be running about the joint with a Pro controller as well. Most people are just not going to bother doing that. Most of the people who buy a Pro controller are the ones who are playing it at home docked. It's just a fact of life. Yes, there is a carry case, and you can do that. But from the Nintendo Switch users I know, and I know a fair few, none of them do that. None of them. In fact, most Nintendo Switch users I know, aside from the ones that are kids, and I mean kids like sub 10 years old, sub maybe 11 years old, that thing doesn't leave the house. It just doesn't. You know, even though it's that hybrid system and it does all that clever stuff of you can play on this and you can play at home, most people keep that sucker at home. Especially when you think about the Nintendo Switch Lite. You can't even take the Joy-Cons off that. You know, they're hammered on for all eternity. But you can still dock it, which means you can dock it and you whip out the Pro controller and away you go. So, chances are, on-board controls built in that aren't attachments you have to snap onto the side or break out a separate controller, you know, it's not something that you would have to worry about. You could just have the controls in the phone. Now, admittedly, you probably could have an app in the phone that would allow you to obviously Bluetooth enable, you know, a DualShock 4 or a DualSense, depending on what you're playing. Probably a DualShock 4, because I would imagine it would be tricky for the phone to be able to stream PlayStation 5 content in a reliable manner to that phone, even if you're at home with your own network, and say you were upstairs in the bedroom playing and your wife is downstairs watching whatever she wanted to be watching, and she didn't want you to be playing because she wanted to watch the telly. Yeah, married life. So then I started thinking things like battery life and reliability and screen size. And the more I look at the current Xperia phones, you have to admit, this is a pretty long phone. That's what Sony has done. They've made these phones, the current, you know, Xperia line, very tall, slender phones, which are really great because, you know, even for a guy like me with a small hand, you know, I can get all over this phone pretty much one-handed. I mean, and when it comes to like typing out text messages, no bother at all. So this is a great phone for small-handed people. And if you're talking for gaming, I mean, this screen ratio, you know, you could have more of the screen built for the actual game and have the sides more used for the UI. So you could actually have more gaming experience and keep the HUD pretty much separate from the game. The HUD would not interfere with the game as much as it does in some games. Because let's face it, there are some games that come out that are cluttered in HUD. So you could still have a HUD in the game, but have a HUDless gaming experience. The best of both worlds. Now, obviously, you couldn't have a phone as thin as this if indeed it had to be split into two so you could have controls. Obviously the sticks would not be as deep as sticks in the D-pad. They would probably be more sliding nubs, pretty much like what we had on the PSP or even the Vita. I mean, the Vita had those sliding numbsticks, but they worked fine. They worked lovely jubbly, in fact. So it would have to be a thicker construction, but with that thicker construction, you know what that would mean? It means you could put in a far beefier processor, and you could put in a much bigger battery. So you could have a game that could play games from the PlayStation Network, you know, use the PlayStation Network apps, play games from PlayStation Now, have all the other gubbins of a phone like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and stereo and, you know, Spotify and whatever else, be completely Sony in nature, be PlayStation in nature too, have a headphone jack, you know, or even Bluetooth to your one of your PlayStation headsets, whether you have the you know, like the Pulse 3D, or you have the Platinum headset, or the headphones with gold or whatever, you know, or a generic set of like Turtle Beach or something. You could Bluetooth to those headphones. You could take a controller out if you wanted, or you use the controls on the phone. And this way, Sony could sell more phones. They could actually come back into the mobile gaming market without having to create a purely standalone device, because we all remember that the Vita was incredible. The Vita was a brilliant system. The one thing that killed the Vita primarily was the memory cards and the proprietary cabling. Now, admittedly, the PlayStation Vita 3000, that one was charged by USB-C. Thank you. But the previous versions, proprietary cabling. Sony learned the lesson, but they learned the lesson too slow on that one. But even at the end of the PS Vita, to this day, even if you pick one up now, you still have to rely on the PlayStation Vita memory cards that are still now prohibitively expensive. And what's more, they're going to become more expensive because they're not making them anymore, because they're not making the Vita anymore. So that basically means that those special ones you used to have to order from Japan that were 64 gig, those, right, they were like about 80 quid or something. You watch what happens to that second-hand scalping market, because we all know what happens to retro vintage systems. Everything goes way up. So you could have games that run the gamut of the last 4, you know, generations of PlayStation on something you have with you all the time, but you could still make phone calls, you could still photo your family, you know, you could still make YouTube videos, you know, you could still tweet and catch up with your friends on Facebook. And when the time takes you, you flip that bad boy horizontal, you smash out that game controller, and you'd run down some laps on like Ridge Racer, you know, or Tekken, you know, or even a bit of Abe's Odyssey, whatever you fancy, you know, whatever it happens to be on PlayStation Now, away you go. And you could probably even have a memory expansion bay, you know, like put in a really big SD card, you know, like put in a terabyte SD card. Let's go nuts, get a terabyte SD card, have a couple of games saved in the phone. I mean, if you've got like a couple of PS3 games, you know, a terabyte card in your phone, think how many games you could have saved in your phone for PlayStation. You could have a lot. And if you were like a real retro guy like PlayStation 2 or PlayStation, you had a terabyte card in your PlayStation phone, you carry most of their back catalogue, you know, because those games are much, much simpler. And it was with the power of emulation. You know, you could have emulators for all those devices. You know, it would work. It would work beautiful. I mean, look at the work that was done by hacker people when it came to that little place, that mini PlayStation from a couple of years ago. The modders got their hands on it, stuck in made it like, you know, basically it was a modified Raspberry Pi. They put their own stuff on it, and they were able to have hundreds of games in it. So what you could do with a PlayStation phone is the sky's the limit. Now, the only things that would hold it back, of course, are pricing, you know, and the idea that, like, hasn't Sony tried this already and it didn't go so well? But it's been a long enough time since the PlayStation 4 that only guys like me really truly remember it. And maybe one or two of you out there who actually ever played one, let alone saw one. And I have to say, this idea could possibly work. It could be Sony's silver bullet to not necessarily get back into mobile gaming, but at least have a foot in the door, you know, because Microsoft ain't doing mobile gaming. And yes, okay, there is the whole Game Pass thing, you play anything, anywhere, anytime, you know, using some of those ideas from Stadia. But there's never really been a real implementation to it that I'm aware of at this point. So if Sony were to make this particular move, this could be something. So using all the wonderful tech that's been made and explored and tested to the nth degree with the Xperia line, marry that with all the wonderfulness that comes from the PlayStation thinky boys at HQ, put all that together, you could be into something very, very interesting. The only real stumbling block is making sure the controls are right. As long as the controls are right and the UI is smooth and clean and really well thought out and gives you not only a great PlayStation experience but gives you a great Xperia experience, things could get real interesting real fast. And that could be the bridging device that maintains gaming history. You know, you could even have it be a device that like talks to the PlayStation 5, you know. Obviously it could, you know, with touch Bluetooth, you know, touch the device to the device, which is something Sony was mucking about with a few years ago. I remember a few years ago at CES, Sony brought out an amp that connected to everything. It connected to your TV, your PlayStation, you know, your stereo, you know, your subwoofer. Actually, I think it was a subwoofer itself that did this. Sorry, it was a subwoofer that connected to all the things, and you could literally take your Xperia device at the time, which I think was the SP, or maybe it was the model after the SP. Anyway, and you could literally just put on the Bluetooth, and you would touch it to the amp, and it would talk to the amp, and the amp would talk to it. And it's like you could bring in that kind of tech again. And it's like, you know, because there's something very satisfying about taking your phone and just touching it against another device to tell the device what you want to do, you know? Or even using voice commands. You say to your phone, blah 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 blah, and then whatever device you've told it through your phone to fire into life and do whatever function, it does it. So you can say to your phone, you know, like turn on the Sony Bravia TV to HDMI 2. On it comes, HDMI 2, start PlayStation 5. Boom. PlayStation 5 starts up. Or your PlayStation 5 starts up because it recognises that the TV is turned to HDMI 2 and that's its call to get busy. This could do a lot of very, very, very interesting things. The more I explore this, the more I walk through it, the more excited I am about the possible ramifications of the idea of a PlayStation Phone 2. Although I think it might need a better name. You know, the Xperia Station perhaps. Or the Xperia Play. Something like that. But I'll leave that to the tech boys. But you got to make sure that the name is simple to follow, because if there's one thing you guys at Sony can't do, is you can't name your phones. I mean, I'm sorry, but your naming convention for your devices just gets all over the place half the time. Your PlayStation branding is brilliant, but when it comes to like your TV, your headphones, and your phones, your naming conventions are just ridiculous, Sony. So you need to figure that out. You need to sort that bit out. But otherwise, I think we're on to something here. I think a Sony phone that's PlayStation compatible, PlayStation enabled, with controls built in, could really be something. But maybe I'm wrong. You know what to do. Typey down below, let me know. Okay guys, this video went a little bit longer than I went because as I was talking I even had more ideas, so you probably see my brain firing off. Okay, I'm gonna love you and leave you. You know the drill. Hashtag support Scottish YouTubers. And of course, as always, aye, nae bother.